What?
Nothing.
What?
Nothing I'm gonna do.
Okay.
All right, let's get this intro started then.
Let's do this.
Let's start the podcast.
Let's get this train wreck rolling.
Ahem. Yo-ho, me hearties, set your sails for outer space, for this be the Bombvoyage Podcast.
No, cancel it. We're done here.
Abort.
No, abort mission.
So, now that we have that unfortunateness out of the way, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the next installment in the Bombvoyage Disney Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Johnson, and joining me as my co-host, as always, Travis. How are you doing today?
It really depends on what you mean by doing.
Yeah. What we are doing today is we are watching my pick on our back and forth for the podcast, which was after last week's interesting adventure through the world of Wes Craig-Clement's Hercules, we decided to look at the immediate response film to that, which was Treasure Planet. So, for those of you guys who don't know the story behind this movie, long story short, this was a movie that these two iconic directors were fighting to get made for years, but kept getting pushed aside for, some throwaway films, like The Little Mermaid or Aladdin or so on and so forth. But this was their passion project that they wanted to get done for a long time. And they finally got it made after, new management at Disney allowed them to do so. And I'm really excited to talk about this one because I feel like Treasure Planet is one of those movies that I think I really just do like this movie a little bit more every time I watch it. After my last time watching as an adult, I was just like, everyone knows obviously there's a lot of adult stuff in Disney movies, and they tackle a lot of darker themes, but there's a couple scenes in this movie where either based on what they do or what they don't do, I'm like, yeah, this is the reason why this is one of my favorites.
I hadn't seen this movie since I was 12. And I watched it and I felt meh. And I hadn't really thought about it since, truthfully. I didn't do anything for me when I watched it, but rewatching it, I actually had... There was a lot better than I thought it was. I didn't give it credit where credit was due. So I'm glad I rewatched it. I'm glad I saw it and gave it more of a chance.
For sure, compared to last week where rewatching Hercules led us in mostly the opposite direction.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, okay. There's... Interesting.
It's one that, in particular, it is a Disney movie I feel like, people don't talk enough about. Just like, your choice for next week we'll get to, which is another Disney movie that people often don't talk enough about. So, on that theme, why don't we get started with the basics of Treasure Planet? So, the one thing I want to bring up about this movie from the get-go is, it's not going to be a thing I'm going to reference all the time, but I think there's a couple of, in particular, sequences I think that Treasure Planet does a really good job of this particular aspect. Most Disney projects, Treasure Planet is based off of an old literary work. In this case, the original book Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And although there's also the live-action Disney version of Treasure Island as well, so it's kind of like a remake or a reimagining of both in a way. But as you stated before, the interesting thing about the original Treasure Island movie is that was the beginning of, it's a base point of where a lot of modern quote-unquote pirate cinema comes from. Even, just the other various versions of Treasure Island that have been done over the years. Even one including, talking felt creatures, there's a lot of... This is a particular story that's been done quite a few different ways. But this particular way of doing it I thought was really interesting. Just although the idea of Treasure Island in space doesn't appeal to everybody, but for me the idea of when people in anime say the word space pirate, they think of one thing, but for me, like, the literal idea of having, like, the imagery of, of, like, this traditional kind of sea combat in space, like, I always thought was really cool.
Okay, that's the one thing that didn't work for me nearly as well. Like, I don't know. There's some parts where they don't. I know it's a movie, and there's only so much you can start thinking is nitpicking at, but there was a parts where it's like, but they're in space. How does this thing work? How does that? They don't.
For sure.
They're just in a ship in space, and they never like try to explain it. I don't want them to go into like huge giant sci-fi.
Yeah, we're not watching Disney Star Trek yet.
Yes, we're not. Yes, I don't want them to be Star Trek, but I want them to be like, give me some explanation, and they don't fully commit it to the space theme. It's just like they kind of just wanted to fly instead of be on a
sail, for sure. Yeah. I definitely sense in certain parts of the movie they take more or less advantage of the idea that they are like in space, and and all
they
that.
Definitely should have taken more advantage, gone either way with it, but I would have definitely them to go more spacey. I don't know. It is a minor annoyance, but it was something that was bugging me throughout the whole movie, I have to say. But when it worked, it worked. The ship does look cool in space and flying with the sails and the whoosh. I like that.
For sure. So I just wanted to set that part aside as, like, although I'm not going to go on, like, beat for beat, I am not the kind of, like, well, the book was better kind of thing, but, like, at the same point, though, some of my favorite scenes in this movie are their direct interpretations of stuff from the book or from the original movie. Like, there's other stuff that's, like, loosely based off of stuff, but, like, I think it is really cool that there is, like, shot-for-shot recreations of certain scenes at particular parts of the Treasure Planet story. So why don't we dive in, as it were? So our story begins actually in a narration, which I thought was kind of a cool idea, where we see this booming voice narrator talking about this pirate called Nathaniel Flint, who is, the most notorious pirate ever. And it's really cool design too, because it's the first like direct alien design that we see in the movie. And it's like he's got this cool like lizard like lockjaw, but then like this line of like 4 or 5 like slit yellow eyes on either side. But other than that, he's still just wearing, just dressed like a pirate, and everyone's doing their things. You're seeing these ships firing back and forth against each other. And the main thing that apparently he was known for that we're told about is the fact that as soon as he would, take over these ships, he would literally vanish without a trace. We then pan back to see that we are actually looking at an interactive storybook read by a small child. Which I thought was kind of a cool way to do it. To start and like being like, whoa, this is actually kind of a little bit more intense than you're used to for a Disney movie, and then kind of like eases you back into the Disney-ness of it all. So, from here we meet the child version of our protagonist, Jim Hawkins, and his mother, Sarah, and we get a chance to meet both their characters and kind of get a sense for their dynamic. And in general, parent characters are usually a little underrated when it comes to Disney movies, usually because most of them aren't there for one reason or another. But, they share some really cute chemistry, and it's nice. You already immediately get a feel for their relationship, where Jim is, head in the clouds, or in the stars in this case, where he's fascinated by all of this pirate stuff and all this, and, his big thing is that he believes that Treasure Planet is not just a fairy tale thing. Treasure Planet being the place that's said to be where Flint would disappear and put all of his treasures, all in one giant place called Treasure Planet. And he believes it's real, but his mother thinks that, oh, it's just a legend. But I know it's real. But she's a nice mother, so she's like, well, if you believe that it's real, then it's real. And, and so they share a nice little scene there. And one of the cooler, like, smaller, like, heartfelt visuals I liked was when it's like, all right, now, it's time to go to bed and all that stuff. And then as soon as she leaves, the screen goes black. And you just see the silhouette of him opening the book lit by the thing under the covers because he can't stop reading. And so that was kind of cute. And the narrator keeps going on about how people have searched, for decades looking for Flint's trove, as they sometimes call it. But, the overall message, in the book being that, that there is no limit to where one can soar. Instantly transport 14 years into the future. So it's a bit of a time jump, but admittedly, it comes off a lot cleaner than most story time jumps I've run into because of the fact that there's only so much information you were supposed to glean from the very beginning. So it's like, it feels like after the time jump is kind of like, quote unquote, the beginning of the movie, and everything before that is just like nice setup prologue. Like the movie would work without the first 5 minutes or so, but it's so really nice that it's there.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know. You could have cut it and it would have changed too much, and I think it would have made the opening slightly more cooler because you get the really cool
the action-packed opening. Yeah.
So maybe that would have been cool to start with, but I mean, I guess it works in context.
For sure. Also in context, for what's worth, there was actually an alternate opening where the main difference was that you were hearing the approximate same story, but it's from the perspective of an adult Jim, telling back the stories from his childhood. And it was originally part of a script where that was going to be somewhat throughout the story, or at least during, like, kind of like one in the beginning, one middle, maybe end kind of thing. But they ultimately decided it'd be better to, focus on Jim in the present tense rather than having them being in an adult Jim telling stories back. I don't know. I think I prefer the way they did it, but it's just sometimes I find that kind of alternative stuff interesting.
It could have been interesting, but I probably would have been better this way.
For sure. So we get to the adult Jim Hawkins, who's played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and we see him on a sunboard, which is one of the cooler, like, niftier kind of inventions in the movie, which is, it's sort of like a weird cross between it's like the space equivalent of a skateboard, but it kind of works like a parasail because it has this giant solar-powered sail that it uses to actually, fly wherever. And you get the sense that he, is what you would imagine the grown-up of, his adventure-loving self would be. He's kind of this, at first this kind of like, you can't tell me what to do, kind of like daredevilish kind of teen character. But we don't see that part of it yet. Right now, we're still in the mode of like, oh, cool visuals, and he's doing all these cool stunts and all this stuff. But eventually what gets him in trouble is that he takes his daredevil thing into a construction yard and does some really dangerous stuff in there. Actually almost gets himself crushed at one point because he's just looking for whatever thrill he can find, until he is then, caught by robot cops. Which was kind of a funny way to end the sequence, because just even the kind of sirens they use in the robot cops, they were clearly going for like the funniest kind of like disarming, like, oh, come on, like they're even basically riding like robot like cop mopeds. Essentially, they're not even like really intimidating following him.
I did love the little robot cops. They were cool. That little thing. So stupid, but I love it. You gotta love it. For sure,
yeah. There's a lot of different... The comic relief in this movie comes in a lot of different forms and a lot of different characters at one point or another. I think that definitely works for this film's benefit, is the variety in the characters. Even the ones that only really have like one scene, like the robot cops. We cut back to the Benbow Inn, which is the inn run by his mother Sarah, who, surprise, is still in the movie. Doesn't have, he's not. We have a Disney protagonist that's not an orphan for once. Yay! So 50-50 is fair enough. We'll get there. But so we see her character. She's overworked and going crazy, and trying to keep track of everybody. And in the midst of talking through all of this, she's trying to defend her son to Doppler, who is a friend of hers, who is a dog scientist. Because this is aliens and stuff, and this also is the first time we see a lot more of just the various kinds of weird alien species of a thing. It's almost like the cantina scene, but, less Star Wars. Not in the shady kind of way, but in the sense of like, oh, look at all the cool kind of aliens all around kind of thing.
Sure.
Not the best comparison, but, it's space. There's aliens and people are eating food, whatever.
Okay.
So so she's trying to defend him, saying that, he's almost off his probation. He's actually been doing really good lately, and no matter what, I know he's rough around the edges, but I don't want to give up on him. Door busts open, arrested by the cops, drops all of her dishes, she's freaking out, and they list off, like, all the things he's messed up, and even to the point where one of the funnier jokes in the movie is when the robot is listing off it's like, in violation of code 009867642, paragraph 3, sentence, and Jim interrupts, 6, thank you, and they just keep going on, because obviously this is not the first time they've had run-ins with Jim Hawkins. So they give him his final warning, saying that if he's ever caught doing anything stupid like this again, then he is going to be sent to juvenile hall. So obviously this does not go well with his mother. Oh, almost forgot one of the funnier jokes in the movie with the robots at the very end when they leave. They're just kind of dissing on Jim, just be like, "We see this all the time, ma'am. Good children going off on bad paths." It's like very like losers. And looks up at him, the robot doesn't even reach for his hat. It just goes up and down. It goes, "You take care now. Let's motor." And they just turn around and go. And it's a simple joke, but I don't know, even as a kid, I thought that was the funniest thing. But, it's little moments like that do often make movies like this. So this is immediately followed by, the concerned mother enraged at him, just like, do you want to end up in juvenile hall? Like, are you trying to, I'm doing my best for you. Like, this is, never. But he's continually just complaining how stuck he is, which... This is a trick I've seen Clements pull off before, and it's a common theme through a lot of the movies I really like. And what I mean by this is this ironic state of where the protagonist starts at compared to their surroundings. Like, for example, if you take, like in Little Mermaid, she is trying to grow up, be her own person, be away from her father, and what she seeks more than anything is to be part of the land, which she's fascinated with, because of the fact that the irony is that her father is literally king of the sea. So, by that very definition, there's literally nowhere else but land she can go that she can escape her father. Mm-hmm. At the same point, Aladdin lives in, what we've heard from, like, this universe, even though we see very few places, that Agrabah is, like, one of the greatest places to live in this sort of thing, but he's the lowest of that. Like, he's the town with this giant palace and all these markets and all these interesting people and happenings. We're told in the beginning, like, how awesome Agrabah is, but he's, like, the one level of person that doesn't get to enjoy that. Jim lives in a world of space travel. He lives in a world where he's, dreamed all of his life of being this grand adventurer with, all these great sights to see and all these places to go. And not only does he live on what pretty much persona is like one of the most boring planets you can think of, but he lives on an in-planet. He's constantly surrounded by people from other planets who get to go to the places he doesn't get to go to. And I think that noticing that really helps relate to his frustration in, being stuck the way that he is. Just curious what your thoughts were on that.
It would have been. It they should have made that slightly more obvious. I don't want them to like say, "Oh no, this is them," but they don't portray it quite as enough. It's cool once you realize it, but you don't realize it right away because it's kind of just moving on where he's just, angsty teenager.
Yeah, because he's like 17 when this movie takes place, so you get that.
He's nondescript teenage age, but yeah, sure, probably, whatever.
So he's still in that point where like you expect the kind of behavior out of him, but like it's throughout the movie you see that more developed or more, defined of that being the way it is. But instead, what they decide, they get to the point their argument's going nowhere, and Jim storms off, and he decides he's just gonna go, walk around waiting for an inciting incident to happen, while Doppler and Sarah continue to just talk about what they're going to do with him. Like, they don't want to obviously send him to juvenile hall, but it really comes through in this movie how much she cares. Like, they try very hard to not make her just like, the nagging mother knows best kind of character. Like, as little screen time as this character gets, I like how they characterized his mother quite a bit. One of her best lines in the movie is right around the corner when we get back to what Jim was doing, but, the few scenes she has, I really like, that you do get a sense of, like, what she wants, what her character is, that kind of thing. But as for Jim, as usually happens this about time in the runtime of the movie, something crazy happens. At this point, being that, this mysterious spaceship crashes in, right in front of the inn, and he is met by a mysterious snapping turtle pirate named Billy Bones. He's got moments to live and uses his last dying breaths to open up this mysterious chest with this small, brown sack in it, pulls him up to him in his last dying breaths after he brings him into the house, as he simply says, "Beware, keep it safe, beware the cyborg." Now, this is one of the first scenes that's a direct comparison to the book and the movie, where, it's just a maroon ship, and instead it was "Beware the one-armed man." But at the same point, though, I like the way that they keep it together. The fun thing I like about how they do it is, one of my favorite aspects of this movie in general is the way it quickly jumps between drama and comedy in ways that don't feel jarring. And this is one of the first ones I really like, when after she's done being mad at him, she kind of like opens up like this locket she has of like all these pictures of him when he's a kid, and she's thinking about him when he's younger. And the main one she sticks on is this idea that, all the time he would come home with some like weird creature he found and ask if he could keep it. And then instantly he busts in the middle of this rainstorm with this giant snapping turtle pirate. And she's just like, what the hell is going on? And like, it's cool because like it is a good laugh, but it also works within the tone that it's not too funny that they can't jump back into serious tone back again.
Yeah, and this whole scene is where the movie really gets going. The whole sequence is really, really good. Mm-hmm. It's really done well. The whole scene where he comes out, "Beware the cyborg." He just
like it's the little things, like how articulated his cough is, even when he's dying. It's not like just a typical thing. Like, he's like really wheezing. And you really get a sense for it, and it's just how like panicked he is when he talks about the cyborg. You already get this idea of this kind of character. This is like one of my favorite kind in general of character introductions, when like so much about a character before they even set foot on screen. When that kind of thing is executed correctly, I love that kind of build up. So before we see almost anything, we already have, we don't even know yet what is inside what even was in the treasure box, or what they're supposed to do. He doesn't even give him directions. He just says, "Keep it safe, beware the cyborg." So after that business is put aside, they decide that they're going to try to figure out what the thing is and what they're after. He opens the thing up to find a strange gold sphere with some strange patterns on it. And what's interesting about it is when they're doing all of this, they're still trying to figure things out. As Doppler is looking at the thing and he says he can't find any, like it doesn't match up to like any language or any culture or anything like that he can think of. And jokes around with like even all of his years of experience, it may take him years to figure out what, how to get into the thing. And almost in instinct, Jim clicks a couple of different things and the thing starts to spin it around and the thing opens up in a great light. And he's just subtly annoyed by it, which is what I really like about Doppler is he works as a great comic relief because he's a comic relief, but he also is like the smart man, which is kind of interesting. Like he's a very knowledgeable person. He's not dumb. He just has a very quirky personality. So he's like, with even all of my years of research, it would take me even further to, hey, like he's just subtly annoyed that he opens up the thing.
Yeah, because he just like randomly presses. He's just got really stupid luckily and just hit the right buttons because he's the main character,
Yeah.
The plot had to move forward.
At the same point, like, obviously this isn't set up in the movie, and this is total headcanon right now. But like, if I were to try to, in some degree, justify why, other than because he's the protagonist, why he could open the thing, like, it supposedly looks like it's structured like a puzzle block or something like that. So it might make sense that like someone like Jim who like thinks more like that or less like pure scientifically would, have an easier time trying to get it open. Like, because the only other person who tries to open it is, this person we'll get to, and they try to open it with brute force. So it makes sense that may have been the reason he could open it. But like I said, that is pure like fan fiction headcanon.
Yeah,
I'm just
that
speculating.
would have been interesting if the movie gave some indication, or maybe he just like maybe all the stories he read gave him some clue or something. But the movie just says they do it because
it's a little prophecy-ish. It's not the best plot point in the movie, but the joke kind of sweeps that under the rug a little bit, which is kind of nice.
Yes, that does help it, and it does just use it to move along to more interesting things. So it's okay. Let's go.
Right. So the Golden Globe, opens up and reveals this giant space map all across the room. And as they look through the whole thing, they realize that it is not merely, just a normal map, but it is like it contains areas far past what some places that even people had possibly ever explored. The main thing being that the map seems already like it's pulling towards one specific direction, and all of a sudden the map picks up speed, zooms across this whole cosmos, and reveals the potential actual coordinated location of Treasure Planet. Which, apparently if this map is to be believed, is actually real. A place that contains, more treasure than the rest of the world combined. And immediately, Jim, being the adventurer that he is, jumps to, we need to go to Treasure Planet, not only because this is what we've built, what we've come to, but, because this is where, we really need to go. I'm going to apologize right now. I skipped a scene, and I talked myself out of it. It's not huge. I'll fix it. So, only other thing is that I forgot how they went from one place to the other. So, immediately after finding the thing, an undisclosed, quote-unquote, group of pirates breaks into the Benbow, chases after them, and the Benbow is burned to the ground. They go to a different place. That's the only thing that changed. Yes. I'm sorry, just it happens. Yeah. So the main thing also was him saying that, we could rebuild the Benbow 100 times over with what we have, because the mom's still devastated that her life's work has been destroyed in an instant. But she's still like, are you out of your mind? There's no way you were setting across the multiple galaxies in order to get to, the home base of the most dangerous pirate that ever lived. which has disappeared and we have no idea is alive or dead because he's an alien, so we have no idea how long, he lived for or anything like that. So once again, jumping back and forth with the comic relief thing, Doppler jumps in again and he goes, I was like, come on, Doppler, back me up here, please. And he goes, Sarah, you're right. This would be a journey such as this is just way too dangerous for him to even consider going on alone. Well, at least finally someone here's speaking some sense. That's why I'm going with him.
I do love that line. That line that whole scene works. It's really good. It's just like, no, of course not. That's it. But I go with him, and he starts gathering all this stuff up. And I love that scene.
And that's what makes Hawkins and Doppler such a good match too, because Hawkins is all adventure and no book smarts, and Doppler is this great. Doppler's irony is that he's he's an astrologist in a world of space, but he kind of sticks to one planet. He's all research and no actual discovery. So the idea of, actually getting to see all of this stuff that he's researched for his whole life is like this big exciting thing. And she's still like, so confused about what's going on. But Jim rings back in the comedy again, and he brings up the third most important reason he wants to do this is because he realizes how much of a screw up he's been, and he sees finding Treasure Planet and fixing all of this like his one last shot to prove to his mother that he can actually be like a legitimate person and actually like not just be the guy that screws things up all the time. Which, it was a mature moment we needed early on, because if I had to deal with, like, I understand why he is like in like pure, teen angst at the beginning of the movie, but like 5 more minutes of it and I would have been really upset. Like they escalated his character just the right amount they needed, just in time to make him tolerable. and sometimes you do have to make a character unlikable, even if he's your main character. But yeah, that is a small but very important bit of character development that really needed to happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I do have to emphasize that it's one more moment and it just would have been too much. And it's nice that he just comes clear and he says it and you're like, oh, thank God. And the movie just feels like...
Because you can tell he means it. That's the big thing. Like, even when he screws up in the first place, unlike most teenager things where they're like, you can't tell me what to do. Like, when he did mess up and he got arrested, he is actually still disappointed in himself. And you get the feeling like it's not just because he got caught. You can tell it's because his mother's disappointed in him. Like, and that's important to her character too, that you can care that, like, that despite, like, everything else in the world he just doesn't give a damn about, that he really does care about his mother and what his mother thinks of him. And despite the fact that his mother is very much still, like, she doesn't really have much else to do until the end of the movie, like, you even feel like a small arc for her in that sense too, of her, despite everything that he's screwed up, that she does still have to, like, accept him as, like, this slightly, accept him as this redemptive character that actually wants to fix things, as, because you imagine the situation, this is the first time she's heard Jim say, like, look, I know I've screwed up before, but I'm really going to change this time, and I'm not going to do anything stupid, but this is the time he means it. And she can tell that. And, like, that's where the importance of, like, minor characters comes from. And as much as I love Jim in this movie, if it wasn't for how good everybody else is in this movie, like, it wouldn't function nearly as much. Because, it's pirates. We're going to have a large, literal crew of characters that we're dealing with. Speaking of a crew of characters, we head out to the space base Montresor, which is shaped kind of like a crescent moon, which is kind of a cool little thing that, like, their quote-unquote moon is actually this giant space base. And it makes for a nice match cut as well.
Yeah, I do love that. I'm not a person who, like, is in with all the cuts and all that, but that does look really cool when you just slowly go into the moon and it just turns a little bit and just like, oh, it's this giant space city.
For sure. As that goes on too, so you once again hear I think it's like the second time we hear the actual like overture theme of the movie, which I also think is really cool because it has it's a lot of horns. It's really flowing, like nice, like piratey kind of like upbeat adventure song kind of thing. Small note, just really like that particular song in the score part of the movie. So they're walking. You see them walking around everything, and Doppler, getting back to comic relief again, has built this big, like, in case of anything kind of suit for himself that he can, like, barely walk around in as they're trying to figure out where they're going. And, you see the subtleties of dangers as he has this really big, intimidating, like, sailor robot alien that he runs into, and so he's like, oh, we're not home anymore. Like, there's, dangerous people about, and, not all aliens are nice like they were at home, and that kind of thing. And they end up on their ship, the RLS Legacy. So they climb aboard the ship, where we start meeting more of the people that are actually on the ship. The first one is a man named Arrow, who is dressed in very, traditional, like, pirate, sailor captain kind of military-ish uniform, and he refers to himself as Arrow, and they say, well, Captain Arrow, it's brilliant to meet you, we're excited to go on this adventure, where he immediately corrects to say, no, I'm actually not the captain is aloft, and spinning down through there is Amelia, who is the captain of the ship, who is a cat-like alien, who is, big surprise. I say that sarcastically, but it's kind of cool that the captain of the ship isn't actually the big, intimidating, masculine rock monster, but is the female, military cat is the captain of the ship, and she is probably one of my favorite characters. Just because great character design, I really like the outfit of the character, but she, she's voiced by Emma Thompson, and she has this ability with a lot of her lines where she, sometimes in mid-line, will jump back and forth between comic relief and serious. Like, she does this really awesomely well-written, like, fast-talking introduction, where she, says, like, I've been on these adventures, but I'm not going to bother you talking about all of my scars. This is my second-in-command Arrow, one of the best people you'll ever have, straight, strong, true, all this stuff. He goes, oh, please, Captain, you flatter me. He goes, like, oh, shut up, I don't mean a word of it. And it shows off this just insane confidence she has, in this role. And, for sure, it's probably one of the best, like 30-second introductions of, like, any character in this movie. Just absolutely love her character.
Yeah, her character definitely brings a more, like, ease adventure type to it that she just brings out better characters. Like, her interactions with other characters are just some of the more interesting stuff, especially with the doctor dude, Dilbert. And, yeah.
Yeah, they, and you see a couple of the smaller characters as they kind of walk around, which is kind of neat. Like, one of the first ones they meet is there's this weird squid creature that literally talks in a language that to us would be just, he talks in farts. And, James steps on one of his tentacles and he freaks out, and Dilbert, like, uses, like, armpit farts and just noises in order to talk back to him and apologize. And he's like, it's like a language called flatulum.
Yeah, that was definitely necessary.
Sometimes you need to think for the kids. But the one I actually thought was interesting was there's this one guy who's got his arms crossed on the side of the ship, and all of a sudden the arms uncross and there's a second face on the chest, and he goes, "What are you looking at, weirdo?" And then the head gets up and the hair turns out to be tentacles, and walks over and is like, "Yeah, wino!" And it's actually just two different aliens. And I'm like, okay, that's clever character design.
I do love the character design in all the minor characters.
Right.
But, I don't know, it was a minor thing that annoyed me. With all the aliens, only the main characters are just like a dog dude and a cat lady and a kid.
For sure. Yeah, it's. I think it's part of it is because like, well, I'll get into that later. They go through those sort of basic introductions before, Delbert accidentally says the word, James was the one that found the treasure, and then she immediately shuts him up. Asks to see him in the cabin, and she very clearly states, this is where she gets into like more of her authority mode, that, like, I don't really care for the crew that you chose for this trip. I think that they all seem to be up to no good. They seem, disorganized and, don't seem like they can be trusted. Which I think part of the reason for that might be something that, once again, it's one of those things that I wish they would have touched on. There's a couple of lines here and there I wish they would have added, but like, it's definitely possible that could have been that they never discussed in this movie how they're funding this voyage. So it's very possible that the reason they went for this particular crew is because, they couldn't afford to hire someone who was, better screened